I'm not sure which like because I know there's a mustard seed ministry or something in BC. They're not called the mustard seed. They're called mustard seed ministry.
Sitting right around. That's with everything in. Yeah. So we actually did quite well considering. I was a little disappointed. I didn't go.
Morning, everybody. I'm going to try that. You could look a little more enthusiasm. Good morning, everybody. Fantastic. Sorry a little late. We were just chasing our speaker down, like literally up and down streets, but we got him. Good morning, Edmonton. Good morning, Foothills. Okay, so we just have some announcements, and then we'll get going here. Calgary Downtown Stampede Barbecue last Friday. Just ran up those stairs. No, I'm not. A big thank you to everyone that participated and helped out with this event. It was a huge success. We served, I guess it's supposed to say, 2,900 meals, right? So that's pretty good. And my favorite part about it was I don't think I saw a single team not participate in some way and doing something, so it was awesome. The Calgary Stampede Shelter Breakfast, which is going to be a much bigger event. Right, Brandon? No? 2,900 meals? 2,901. That's all you got to get to. Okay. As we mentioned last few Faith Connects, the shelter will be serving free pancake breakfast with live music and family-friendly games is tomorrow. There will be a bus heading down from downtown to the shelter at 9:30, returning downtown at noon. For downtown staff, families are welcome to come. Somebody's asking about registering for the bus. I don't know anything about that. I'm sorry, but there's just a bus, so get there and you're on a bus. It'll be great. This one's going to be interesting. Donations of water, because I was asked how many flats of water have been donated. I actually don't know how many, but there's a lot. So here at TMS, we are so blessed to have such a support from the people of Calgary. We put a plea out for water, and the response was literally unbelievable. We received huge amounts from companies, individuals. We had somebody drop off 80 cases just this morning, 50 from another. We've received so much water that we are storing it in every possible area of downtown. So if you have space in your office and you come in there one day and there's water stored there, that's what's happened, okay? With the hot weather, our guests and vulnerable people in our area around TMS really need water, so we're thankful to receive it. So we're giving out, if you get off a bus, you're getting a bottle of water. If you're getting on a bus, you're getting a bottle of water. We got water at the wellness clinic. We got water anywhere you want water to give to people. We will have water for you to be able to give to people, so that'll be great. Next week's speaker is Debbie Fawcett, who is the reintegration chaplain in Edmonton, and this week is Pastor Bryn Thiessen from the Cowboy Trail Church. Now, you were here last year for Stampede. I don't think he spoke at Stampede, did he? He was around it, though. Stampede week. Anyway, the guy was amazing, and so when Steve said, Bill, you're now in charge of Faith Connect, and there's one thing you have to pull off. You have to get this guy here for Stampede Week. And so we pulled it off. Big round of applause. Let's welcome our guest speaker this morning, Pastor Bryn Thiessen.
Wasn't sure where I was going, but I was here a year ago, so you look sort of same. Well, I can see you're all familiar with church. You picked the back seats. That's good. You can always pick out a church crowd in a hurry. Actually, they've started to send bus drivers to seminary, not to teach them anything except to get people to sit in the back. So those of you, how many remember me from last year? How many remember a thing I said? Because I don't have a clue what I said to you either, so if I repeat myself, please forgive me. Give you a little history. My name is Bryn Thiessen. I'm from Sundre, actually. I live southwest of Sundre, 20 miles. I'm a rancher and a preacher and a poet and a day worker. And I'm employable in a really good economy. Past that, I'm on my own. So I've managed to make 57 years without a real job, so I think I'm a success. Growing up, I was the only boy in my family. I grew up with 4 sisters. Our neighbor had 4 daughters. Our partner had 3 daughters. And the people we visited most had 4 daughters. So I grew up with 15 girls, which might sound like a bargain until you realize I'm Mennonite by background and I grew up in hand-me-downs. So my crowning achievement in school was in 1975. I won Mr. Legs. I wore a dress that day, didn't even know it was on. So after that, I dropped out. I figured I'd accomplished everything I could educationally wise, so I went on with life. And I preach at a church called Cowboy Trail Church, which meets Tuesday nights in Cochrane. We were 13 years in February. We started to try and meet the horse community with somebody with a service that worked for them in the ranch community and a little different. Cowboy churches are quite common in the States. Have become more common up here in Canada. We were one of the first. It's been kind of interesting because I never planned on being a preacher. Never planned on being in church that long. But I've learned that it's not such bad. That's where God has had me. I grew up with Pioneer Ranch camps. Some of you might be familiar with the work of InterVarsity and Pioneer. So that was my training ground in terms of learning. And I learned to talk through, once I started school, I talked a little. But I talked fast. You think I talk fast now? You should have heard me then. But my mother can remember the first time I ever spoke. I was 4 years old, and I was eating breakfast, and I said, "This porridge is a little cold." And my mother got excited, which is rare for a Mennonite woman, but she said, "I knew you could talk. What took you so long?" And I said, "Well, up to now, everything's been all right." So I was what you call a compliant child, I guess, to that point. I didn't really stand out much, outside the fact that I was a boy. I looked like my sister because we dressed the same. And that's why I grew this mustache. My father has poor eyesight. He couldn't tell us apart, so I needed a distinguishing feature. And if you have Mennonites in your background, you know that your sisters can grow a mustache too, so it takes a little time. I hadn't thought of that, I know, but it's true. Eastern European side of them somewhere, it doesn't matter. But I also, as a poet, was where I got my start. I spoke in public speaking in 4-H. I was part of a 4-H club, and you had to public speak, and we were a small club, so all had to speak, and I spoke against some really good speakers. Thunder area had some, so you had to get better. The advantage I had was I'd always had a great memory. So I could hear someone's speech twice, and I could repeat it, word for word, gesture for gesture, often better than they did. So people didn't like me much, because if I was up first, they knew I could do their speech, and they'd be stuck. But being an improv speaker, I would make it up as I went along. I'd add to it or take away. I could remember what I said, and once in a while, I'd do an entirely different speech just because I felt like it. So, talking to guys now years later that judged me, they said there was no category you fit in. You were a stand-up comic that did monologues, but not speeches, but everybody liked you, so we had to give you something. So that's kind of how I did it. Tell you a few stories. I learned from a lot of different things. When I got here, I thought, well, if they'd given better instructions, I'll give you the instructions I got last year. I ride some leases on the upper forestry there. Any of you been out to Mountain Air Lodge that you still own but you're trying to get rid of? Any cows you see around there are cows that I'm responsible for in the summer. From there up to the fallen timber, all the way up the trunk road, there's cattle scattered in there, and it's kind of interesting. But the guy gave me instructions. He said, well, you go there, and he said, when you get to that clearing, you take your third cut blocks, you go up the hill through the trees, go to your left, and there's a trail. You have any idea how many cut blocks, clearings, trees, and hills there are in that country? But it made sense once I got there because I knew the general lay of the land. I could figure it out. So here, if you'd have said turn left at the dead car, I'd understood. So I went a couple of places I hadn't been for quite a while. I hadn't been downtown since last year. But you're in the same place, just a different parking lot, and I never asked instructions. But speaking of instructions, one of my friends, an old guy named Lloyd Dolan, he's been gone for some time now. He was a horse trader and a contractor, and he lived long enough everybody liked him. Truth was, he was a rotten thief. But if you live long enough, people forget that, and that was Lloyd's advantage. He was a dirty horse trader. He actually traded his wife out of 6 yearlings. She wanted a rodeo. Because he wanted them so he could sell them and make money, and she wanted a horse all the kids could ride. So he said he had one behind the barn. She said, quiet? He said, yeah. He said, all kids can ride him? He said, all 9 at once. You can catch him any time you want. Finally convinced her to trade. She went out and looked. The horse was laying there dead. Lloyd said, I didn't lie. All 9 kids can get on him at the same time. You can catch him any time you want. One of my favorite stories was his youngest son, Wayne, come in one day. And it was just before Halloween, and there was 5 boys in the family and 4 girls, and the boys got together and decided they better practice tipping over an outhouse. Be ready for Halloween. So they done that. They're eating breakfast, and Lloyd comes in, and he said, which one of you boys tipped over the outhouse? Nobody said nothing. So he said, let me tell you a story about a kid named George Washington. He said, when George was a little boy, one day he chopped down a cherry tree. His father came to him and he said, which one of you chopped down a cherry tree? And George said, I can't lie, it was me. He said, that man went on to become the President of the United States. Of course, Wayne felt real good, and he thought, well, if that's what it takes, honesty gets you. So he said, Dad, I'm the guy that tipped over the outhouse. Lloyd took him out back and hung a licking on him like you wouldn't believe. He's sitting there going, Dad, what's the deal? I thought if I told the truth, those good things would come. He said, son, the difference between you and George was George's father wasn't in the tree when he chopped it down. So that's kind of the way I learned, was by listening and by watching and by thinking. I got into poetry because I'd always enjoyed poetry, and when I was a kid, if you could write songs, it was all right, but poetry didn't really want to be. So I didn't tell anybody I wrote poetry for years. I'd write it, I'd look at it, and I'd hide it. I've never found it since. I don't know what it was like. Most of those houses we lived in are torn down, the one burnt down. As I got older, I wrote a little more, and I started to recite, and I learned about the history that cowboys had with poetry and lyrics, and understood that a lot of it comes from a Scottish ballad or an English ballad. They rewrote the words. Streets of Laredo is an old English ballad called St. James Hospital. A lot of those came, and they just changed it to suit things, so that's what I did too. And I wrote some of my own, and I used to get in trouble in school because being different means when I asked you a question, you sometimes wouldn't answer quite what they expected. Most of the teachers I had are now dead. They were old when I had them, and they're really old now. But I met one old gal in a nursing home about 20 years ago, and people said, you taught Bryn, what was he like as a student? The old gal was just as nice as could be. She said, I tried to help him, but I don't think I could do him much good. So I knew what teachers thought. If I get in trouble and they said, Bryn, tell us a poem, I'd go, Mary had a little lamb, she tied him to the heater. Every time he turns around, he burns a little cedar. Is that a little too quick? How many of you are agriculturally based? How many of you are involved in agriculture at all? Let me ask you a question. What do you eat? We're all involved in agriculture. People don't realize that. They all eat, and that's part of agriculture. So when I speak to crowds, sometimes I get non-agricultural crowds like you, so I have to be careful what I say so you'll understand. But most of you probably drink coffee, right? A staple diet has vitamin C. Chocolate cake, all those things, if they have a C, they have vitamin C, I thought, growing up, so they were healthier. But growing up in a Mennonite family, we drank pretty good coffee till we got a Swedish hired man. Swedes really like their coffee. And then growing up in a Norwegian community, we didn't fit. There's a saying that 10,000 Swedes ran through the weeds chased by one Norwegian. So we hired a Swede, and he liked his coffee before he got out of bed, and he liked really good coffee. He taught me to make good coffee, and he taught me to have an afternoon nap in case there wasn't time in the afternoon. You can think about that. It'll make sense. But a bunch of years ago, I was going through Calgary here, and I had a chance to stop, but met a gal at a deal I spoke at was opening a new place. And this was long before there were many coffee shops and anything special, so I stopped in and realized I'd made a mistake. The place wasn't what I could picture, kind of 1960s Saskatchewan. We sat there and talked old-time and farm machinery. So I asked the gal what she'd recommend. She said an ice mocha. I'd never heard of ice mocha back then. I'd had frozen coffee because I used to have a steel thermos. I did some horse flogging. And it wasn't that good a thermos, so the coffee would freeze. And a coffee popsicle isn't bad, but don't lick the thermos at 30 below. Your tongue stays there for a while. So when I thought as I drove home, I thought like this. Well, the thing that I miss about living today is the look and the smell of the old-time cafe with the fly strips on the ceilings. The menus on the wall, you know, it's the coffee they brewed that I miss most of all. It's made fresh every morning, hot, strong, and black. It'd twist your intestines, keep your bladder on track. With eggs in the morning or an afternoon pie, it's part of the past that I wish wouldn't die. But they got these new things called coffee cafes. So I wandered into one in town the other day. I wandered in careful, but my hope sure did sink. I didn't mind the music, but the decor, it was pink. I glanced at the ceiling, no fly strips in sight. So I looked at the menu, something didn't seem right. See, it listed coffees I couldn't pronounce. Judging by the price by the pound, not the ounce. Then this waitress come over, she looked at me in disgust. I didn't know if my clothing or the smell of cow dust. So I flashed her a smile and a howdy or two. I asked if they carried a true cowboy brew. She looked me over careful. I could see she's confused. So I said, well, here's the recipe and just what you do. Now you fill a tin pail full of water from the creek. Then you put it on the fire with plenty of sticks. Well, then add your coffee. 8 handfuls should do. Then while it boils, you find a horseshoe. You place it in careful. When it sinks real slow, well, then your coffee's about ready to go. You know, by the time I got finished, she'd passed out on the floor. So I made my exit back out that door. Back to my home range where I still got friends, because I just stand out too loud among those mocha blends. See that? You can, oh, don't clap. You don't have to. I get nervous when people clap. Let me tell you why. Most of you don't know this, but we used to follow the milk cows home. Everybody had a milk cow or two. When you follow a cow and you hear that pattering sound, you don't smile, you step sideways. There, you can draw some pictures, that's good. But I thought, what do you speak about to a bunch of guys at Mustard Seed who deal with people? And I thought, well, you talk about people. I've learned that in life as I've grown along. I can remember people telling me, what are you going to do with your life? I said, I have no idea. My ambitions in life were to never grow up, never get a real job. I succeeded by the age of 3. I'd gone as far as I wanted to. As I got older, I always knew I was interested in livestock and worked with livestock, but also interested with people. And people would say, you need to work with people. And I said, not a chance. You know what they're like? But I kept doing that. I worked with them through pioneer camps for years. I was volunteering in the summer, ran a horse program as my father had. Worked with kids that were semi-delinquent. Some of them were fully delinquent. I used to get people who'd phone me up. They said, we understand you work with boys. So I'd talk to them, and 85% of them, I'd say, take 2 weeks off, take your boy fishing, let me know if you have trouble after that. Put something into it. Once in a while, I'd take a kid. My favorite, I don't remember his name, was in 1988 during the Olympics. I said, yeah. They said, you don't have to go to school. Can he come spend 10 days with you? And he did. And I took him back home. He was about 12 years old. He spent 10 days with us, just doing whatever we had to do. I took him back. When I got him to the house, I said, your mother's crazy. Learn to live with it. Your father has. And his father just nodded. I mean, his mother had some real things disconnected. I said, just accept it. You're not going to change it. You're going to just have to learn to live with it. And his father just looked and nodded, and that's the only advice I could give him. It'd be nice to give him something bigger. As I grew older, I got a little more advice. Most males do. I was a bachelor till 37. When you're single, if you can remember being a single male, you can have an opinion and no one can tell you you're wrong. Then I got married at 37 to a gal who had 3 kids, and I became wrong instantly. But it's come to be 20 years here in a couple of weeks that we've been married, and the kids are all grown. I have 1 granddaughter, another grandchild coming. 2 of them are married. The 3rd one thinks he'd like to be. She met a real neat gal. I just talked to her dad last night at the deal. He said, your son is going out with my daughter. I said, you're right. I heard that. I actually met the gal, very nice. But I have a simple rule, is always take time for people. As I learned, a pastor at church had the advantage when we started. I was a preacher and Mike McGee was a pastor. There are different gifts and different things, and so really helped, gave Mike a chance. He was a seminary prof, had been a pastor, had gone back to it in Florida. But gave him a chance to just reconnect with people and be a pastor without having to worry about preparing things. Gave me a chance to learn to pastor, to just be a preacher, to teach. And I grew up under some great teachers and realized that as I got older, how many people grew up under weak teaching. Christians are great. They'll put up with anything. Have you noticed that? They'll put up with poor preaching, everything. They'll show up every week. Some of them will grumble, some of them won't, but they'll still be there. And I said, no, I'll find a place to teach it. When people say they're looking for a church, I said, find a place where the worship is meaningful and where you're being taught. And if you're me, you'll go for good teaching or for good worship every time. But find a place that's both. So we're traditional there at Cowboy Trail. We sing hymns out of a hymn book. You might have heard of those. No overhead, no people. I've noticed most little churches with overhead, they put the songs up on the screen, then tell everybody to stand up and nobody can see. And I point that out to them. So we still sit down to sing, we stand up to pray. When we started, we had people giving testimonies, so we got to know one another, and we finally came up with some rules on testimonies. We said, we want to know what God did in your life, not the devil. Because people will tell you things you don't need to know. Which is also why I don't marriage counselor. They'll tell you everything, and I don't want to know that much about them. I do a lot of weddings, but I don't want to know that much about you. I don't need to. I'm a poor pastor because I'm not nosy. People think I know everything, and I said, I haven't got a clue what's going on because I don't need to. But I always tell my wife when people phone, I said, take time for people. Put a little effort into it. Give them a chance. And I run across people from my past all the time now. Last night I was at the Old Time Rangeman dinner there at the Palliser. I've been there the last few years. I've been there as a speaker. I've been just asked to come do grace. This year I'm just going to come to be a part of it. They phoned me yesterday about 2 o'clock, said, would you do grace tonight? And I said, sure. But I ran across a gal there that I'd been to Nova Scotia with in 1979. I hadn't seen her since. She's with a guy from GEM that had come up to it, but I hadn't seen her for coming on 40 years. I said, you're one of the few people that knew me before I had a mustache, and she just laughed. I did a wedding last weekend, and a gal came up. She said, you must be Bryn Peace. And I said, yeah. Did I recognize that voice? She'd been at my place, I think 25 years ago. She was about 15, had come to have a junior high school that came out, a bunch of kids that came out different schools. She said, do you remember me? And I said, sort of. She's one of those big voices that's in the past. And she said, you used to sit around and tell stories. You get about halfway through one, and you'd say, sometimes I scare myself. And she said, I'd chime in, Bryn, you scare all of us. And then she laughed. And I could remember that. But from 25 years, I meet people that I met 40 years ago that remember me. So people get impacted by who you are, by what you say, by how you care. And that's what you understand that well. And one of my favorite evangelists in the whole Bible is found in John 4. Do you remember her? I call her TSW, the Samaritan woman. Just how she did. And when God meets people, it's neat how Jesus deals. And I just spoke about this in my church not long ago, but I said the first thing you need to do is meet basic needs. I spoke about ministry. First thing you need to do is meet people where they need the most. You understand that with the people you deal with. People always need the gospel. But if you're really hungry, what's the difference? So if I said, what's the most important thing you can give somebody, what would you tell me? You'd all sit there like Baptists and be quiet. See, in livestock, we say the most important thing that you can give an animal is water. But that's not true. The most important thing for all of us is air. We can live the least amount of time without air. If you don't have oxygen, it doesn't matter what else you get, you won't live. They say it's 3 minutes without oxygen, something like 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, 3 months without shelter, which is true except in a northern climate. In a northern climate, when it's cold enough, shelter becomes just as important as oxygen. Well, the body can adjust. As you can remember some of those Arctic explorers, I forget which one, stuck in the ice all winter. It warmed up to like 20 below, and these guys are working outside with their shirts off because they got too much. Your body can adjust. But first it needs oxygen. It needs those nutrients. So meet people where they're at. And I'll give you the story. You all know the story, and I could probably quote it from verse 2, but I always tell people, when someone's reading from the Bible, pay attention. When they just quote from it, they could be lying. And once in a while I misquote things just to see if they're paying attention. I got a couple old boys there that are pretty sharp. But he does like this. Of course, the Pharisees had heard, I'll kind of give you the prologue a little. John 4, it says this, the Pharisees heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. Although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. When the Lord learned of this, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. Of course, I always explain to people that to go through Samaria, of course, what they were the distant relatives that got kicked out. Every family has one. You trace it back to the exile. I said they were the culls. Their forefathers were the people that weren't even worth taking as slaves, were left behind, intermarried with the locals, became the Samaritans. They had some of the same belief. But when you went there, people would tend to go around. I said it's like going from Cochrane to Sundry. Instead of going through Cremona, you'll swing around through Didsbury or swing way to the west. That's really how I explained it to people, so the Samaritans were something you didn't go. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, you are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. And Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? He's basically saying, you're thinking like a man. You got nothing to do. You're just big words. But he's drawing her in. He's intriguing her. He meets her at her basic need, which is salvation. But the way he draws her in, first he speaks to her. She's a Samaritan. She's a woman, so she's wrong twice in that culture. But he speaks to her. He engages with her. And people have noticed that about people, that you can engage with them. The Stampede, people are a little more friendly, a little stranger. different things I see them at. But I know the people you deal with will seldom meet your eye. Culturally, I understand a little of them. I understand the ranch culture better. But to meet you in the eye, to meet you, to greet someone, a sign of respect. In the Western world, we still shake hands with a strong grip. It's fun going to that Rangeman dinner because them old boys, most of them are still strong and they got a good firm grip. Marinense wasn't this year, but one guy's comment, usually he's there to speak. He said, I can't stand his handshake. It's like a dead fish. Said he's a great guy. Said I'd probably vote for him if I lived here, but I can't stand his handshake. Well, we meet, but Jesus met this gal head on. Well, I looked at her and addressed her. Treated her, met her with that need to be noticed first. And then drew her along. He said, you know, if you knew who you're talking to, you'd ask me for a drink. She said, yeah, you got nothing to draw water from. How are you going to get that living water? And Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. So he's intrigued her. If you can imagine having to go draw water every day and a guy comes and said, if you drink this water, you'll never be thirsty again. She said, I want that. He got her attention and he offered her something. Not with a switch and bait, with an honesty. Then he says, go get your husband. And she said, I have no husband. And he says, I know. You've had 4 and the guy you're with now is not your husband. He recognizes Jesus has a great advantage of he can see everything, but he recognizes who she is. He acknowledges that, but he doesn't reject her. A lot of people say, well, I don't come to church, but if I come to church, it'd be yours. I have others that say, well, I'd come to church, but first I got to get my life together. I said, that's not how it works. Jesus never said, get all your life together. Like I say, don't get your poop in a group before you come to church. You don't need to do that. Too often the church has a door that you got to be the right shape to fit through. And that's not true. You look at what Jesus offered. The reason I call this woman a great evangelist is she went back to her village and said, come see the man that knows everything about me and still likes me. Come and meet him. And that's what our job is, to introduce that living water, that thing of Christ, that person of Christ. Slowly, but first meet their needs. When you look at Jesus' evangelism, not everybody responded, but he still went. When you deal with people, your success will be low. In some ways, in other ways, it's high. But just keep at it. Treat them as individuals, enjoy them for who they are and what they are. And just see what God does. Let God have the increase. People always say, I can remember because we started Tuesday night, we got a lot of preachers came to church because we were different, we were new, we were a different night, we didn't interfere with their preaching. And guys would come up, and preaching is like every other occupation, it's a strut and stick. People brag about where they went to seminary and different things. And they said, where do you go to school? I said, well, I've never been there. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I have a Jack Pine degree in theology and veterinary medicine. And they just look at me like I'm a total idiot. And I said, well, I've had some teaching from some of the best in the world, working for InterVarsity. I said, grew up under some great preachers. I said, read a lot, but I've never been to seminary. And then, so they asked, and one guy's question was, a few of them said, well, how do you handle evangelism? I said, I haven't got a clue. And one guy got mad at me. So I said, look, at that point there was probably 200 people coming to church. I said, if I can empower 200 people with the Word of God, it's far more effective than if I just work on evangelism. I said, the church's job is to evangelize, not mine. Their job is to bring people, invite them along, get alongside them, make friends with them, spend time with them, be interested in them. I said, we're all called to evangelize, but very few are called to be evangelists. I said, the other problem is most preachers sound the same. And they look and say, what do you mean? I said, let me tell you a story, one of my favorite stories. Anyone here been to Domaine, Manitoba? One of the flattest places in the world. The ground rises half an inch a mile. If you stand still for 2 days and look in one direction, you'll see the back of your head. That put her in perspective. Domaine's a little town in there. They've got, a friend of mine was preaching in there some. Like most churches, they'd had trouble finding preachers. When you're a small church, you either get an old guy everybody had or a young guy nobody had. So they tried the old guys, and that wasn't working, so they hired a young guy. He'd been there 3 days, and old Jim died. Jim was just the local guy. Everybody has one like him. So the town fathers got together, and they said, look, nobody liked him. We got to have a funeral. Nobody will be there, but we'll get the kid to do it. I don't know the guy's name. All they ever called him was the kid. So they gave him instructions, little rural graveside. They said, don't expect anybody there, but we can't let him go without somebody saying some words over him. So he drove around. Of course, he got lost, pulled into this clump of trees, dug in the ground, 2 guys standing there. Said, sorry, I'm late. They seemed kind of surprised he was there. He said, that's right. He was nervous, so he never looked at him, pulled out his Bible, started to talk a little. explained how when God made man, he took a handful of dirt, and when you take the human body, break it down, take out the fluids and the proteins, you're left with the chemicals that make up a handful of dirt. And they looked interested. Nothing worse than looking interested to a new preacher. He preached all 66 books of the Bible, didn't bog down the Song of Solomon, nothing. Preached all through her, jumping up and down. I see you've read it, that's good. Got all excited, commissioned the body, drove off. The one guy looked at the other one and said, you ever seen anything like it? The guy said, I never have. And I put in septic tanks for 27 years. So remember those words when you're dealing with people. Treat them where they're at. Meet them where they're at and take them to the next step. That's God's job. Your job is to listen. So thanks for all you do. It is neat to know what's happening. Wherever I go, there's people that are doing the right thing, that are dealing with people. And that's what you're called to a culture. When people say you're called to a cowboy church, does that mean you got to wear a hat? I said, no, anyone's welcome. Any church, they always are. But we're called to a culture to meet. We're called to meet them where they're at and let Christ take them to the next step. Let's just have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that your work continues in many places, in many ways. Thank you for these men and women, their willingness to serve, that they serve a risen Savior, that they go out there with that drink of water. They're just talking about water, and Father, we offer them first physical water. We also offer them that living water that is you. Thank you for the lesson of the Samaritan woman, that as they meet you, they're changed. As we encounter a living Christ, we can't stay the same. So turn your Spirit loose within us. Let us go forward in the power of a risen Son. We thank you for these things. Amen. Oh, thank you. Just like having somebody else in school, you get out to recess earlier now, don't you?